Uncovering the Drac's Past. Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik stood in the shuttle bay of the Galactic Library, taking in the sheer scale and grandeur of the vast repository of knowledge. The air was thick with anticipation as they disembarked from their shuttle, greeted by a delegation of 3 senior librarians, experts in ancient crystal data technology. These individuals, with their years of experience and dedication, understood the significance of the mission at hand. With a brief exchange of introductions, the group moved with purpose toward the library's secure decoding chambers. As they walked through the echoing halls lined with ancient texts and glowing data panels, Dr. Kenson couldn't help but marvel at the history contained within these walls. Yet the weight of their task pressed heavily on her. The Drac's history had been shrouded in mystery for so long, and now they had the chance to unravel it, if the crystals would cooperate. Arriving in the decoding chamber, the team gathered around a central table where the precious data crystals were carefully placed. Some of the crystals, they knew, were damaged beyond repair, their glow dim and faltering. Others still pulsed faintly with the ancient knowledge locked inside. Dr. Malik, ever meticulous, began the process of cataloging the crystals according to their condition, knowing that even the most fragile might hold vital pieces of the puzzle. Over the course of the next several days, the team worked tirelessly, decrypting and piecing together fragments of data from the surviving crystals. It was a painstaking process, with each crystal revealing only snippets of information. A broken conversation here, a blurred image there. But gradually the pieces began to coalesce, forming a clearer picture of the Drac's forgotten history. Some of the crystals were too damaged to provide anything useful, their data corrupted beyond retrieval, but those that remained offered glimpses into a time when the Drac were vastly different from the marauding force they had become. Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik pored over each fragment, analyzing and cross-referencing until they could piece together a coherent narrative. As more data was extracted, it became clear that the Drac were once esteemed members of the Stellar Accord, a coalition of civilizations dedicated to maintaining peace and prosperity across the galaxy. The Drac of that era were diplomats, scholars, and warriors in equal measure, respected and admired by their allies for their strict codes of honor and their commitment to the common good. But the story took a darker turn as the team uncovered the rise of the Chosen Ascendants, a radical faction within Drac society that believed their race was destined to rule the galaxy. At first, the Ascendants were dismissed as extremists, their teachings considered fringe. But over generations, their influence grew, infecting the Drac's youth with visions of galactic conquest and destiny. The once honorable Drac became increasingly militant, driven by the belief that they were the chosen rulers of the universe. As the crystals yielded more of their secrets, the narrative of the Drac's transformation became ever more tragic. The data depicted scenes of growing tension between the Drac and the other members of the Stellar Accord. The Drac began annexing territories on the fringes of their borders, justifying their actions as necessary for maintaining order. The other civilizations attempted to appease the Drac, hoping to avoid conflict, but the Ascendant's doctrine was unyielding. The final crystals painted a picture of a galaxy descending into chaos. The members of the Stellar Accord, realizing that appeasement was no longer an option, were forced to take up arms against their former allies. The war that followed was brutal and devastating, with fleets clashing in the void of space and planets being reduced to ashes. Yet, the details of this war were fragmented and incomplete, leaving much to speculation. It was clear, however, that the Drac suffered a catastrophic defeat, one that seemingly led to their near extinction. But there was no definitive conclusion in the data. The final entry suggested that while the Drac were believed to have been wiped out, there was always the possibility that some had fled, going into hiding to bide their time. The resurgence of the Drac in the present day seemed to confirm that these remnants had survived, emerging once more to pursue their long-held dreams of conquest. With the data collated and the history of the Drac laid bare, Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They had uncovered a story of a once great civilization brought low by radicalism and war, a story that held echoes of their current struggles. But what was most sobering was the realization that despite their knowledge, they had no clear solution to the Drac threat. The history they had uncovered might not provide them with the tools to defeat the Drac, but it had given them insight into the enemy they faced, a race that was once honorable and proud, now twisted by the legacy of the chosen ascendants. As they prepared to send a transmission to Ambassador Solane with their findings, there was a sense of both accomplishment and unease. They had uncovered the truth, but what they did with it would determine the future of the galaxy. The Drac's forgotten legacy. Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik sat in the secure conference room, the dim light from the holographic projector casting shadows across their faces. The data they had painstakingly pieced together over the past few days was now fully collated, and the history of the Drac was ready to be presented. But as they reviewed the information one final time, the weight of what they had uncovered pressed heavily upon them. The holographic display came to life, showing the images and scenes from the data crystals in sequence. It began with the early days of the Stellar Accord, where the Drac were shown as noble and honorable members, deeply involved in the governance and protection of the galaxy. The Accord had been a beacon of hope, a shining example of what could be achieved when civilizations worked together for the common good. But then came the rise of the chosen ascendants. The holographic display showed their fiery speeches, their gatherings that swelled in numbers over the years. Their doctrine was clear: the Drac were the galaxy's chosen rulers, destined by the cosmos to bring order to a chaotic universe. The Ascendants' ideology spread like wildfire, and within a few generations, the Drac were no longer the peacekeepers they had once been. They had become conquerors, driven by a belief in their own superiority. The display shifted to show the Drac's annexation of neighboring territories. The other members of the Stellar Accord, hoping to avoid conflict, initially attempted to appease the Drac, granting them control over certain star systems and resources. But it was never enough. The Ascendants' vision of Drac dominance could not be satisfied with mere concessions. The data showed scenes of tension mounting, of uneasy alliances fraying as the Drac pushed further and further into the galaxy. Finally, the display revealed the outbreak of war. The data was fragmented, with some scenes missing or corrupted, but the overall picture was clear. The galaxy had erupted into conflict as the members of the Stellar Accord united against the Drac. The war was brutal and destructive, with entire fleets wiped out and planets laid to waste. The Drac, once seen as protectors, were now feared as the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. But the end of the war remained shrouded in mystery. The data hinted at a catastrophic event that led to the Drac's downfall, an event that was believed to have wiped them out entirely. Yet, as Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik knew all too well, the Drac had survived, emerging from the shadows after centuries to once again pursue their dreams of conquest. As the holographic display faded, Dr. Kenson turned to Dr. Malik, her voice heavy with the weight of their discoveries. "We need to contact Ambassador Solane immediately. He needs to know the truth about the Drac and the history we've uncovered." Dr. Malik nodded in agreement. "This information needs to be shared with the Galactic Council. They need to understand that the Drac weren't always our enemies, that they were once our allies. Maybe, just maybe, there's still some part of that old honor left in them." The two scientists transmitted their findings to Solane and followed up by opening a channel to discuss in detail the rise of the chosen ascendants, the war that followed, and the Drac's eventual return to power. Solane listened intently, his expression grave as he absorbed the information. "This is significant," Solane finally said. "The Galactic Council needs to be made aware of this. We need to understand our history if we're going to have any hope of shaping our future. And while this knowledge may not provide us with a direct way to defeat the Drac, it does offer us insight into who they are and what drives them." Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik agreed. The history they had uncovered was both tragic and enlightening. It was a reminder that even the most feared enemies were not born that way. They were shaped by their experiences, their beliefs, and the choices they made. And perhaps, armed with this knowledge, there was still hope for a different future. As they ended their communication with Solane, the two scientists sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the enormity of what they had learned. The galaxy was a vast and complex place, full of secrets and mysteries. But today, they had brought one of those secrets into the light. And with that light, they hoped to guide the galaxy towards a better future, one where the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The Forgotten Legacy. Back aboard General Zorvan's flagship, the atmosphere in the war room was charged with a focused intensity. The recent battle had been won, but the unsettling presence of the Drac's new weapon loomed large in everyone's mind. Zorvan, along with his senior officers, gathered around the central holographic display, watching as the scientists and engineers worked feverishly to dissect the data collected during the skirmish. Dr. Tenva, the lead scientist aboard the flagship, manipulated the holographic controls with precision, bringing up the weapon's energy signatures and the brief moments of data captured during the battle. "This is unlike anything we've encountered before," she began, her voice tinged with a mixture of awe and concern. "The energy output is unprecedented. The initial discharge alone was enough to incapacitate one of the Helian cruisers, and that was only a fraction of its potential." Zorvan leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing at the fluctuating energy readings displayed before him. "What are we looking at here, Doctor? How does it work?" Dr. Tenva took a deep breath before explaining. "From what we can gather, the weapon channels an immense amount of energy into a focused beam. The beam not only delivers a massive amount of kinetic damage, but also appears to disrupt electrical systems on a fundamental level. It's a combination of brute force and electromagnetic interference capable of bypassing most known shielding technologies." Captain Hale, who had joined the discussion after coordinating the post-battle operations, frowned. "Is there any way to counter it? Surely there must be some weakness, something we can exploit." Dr. Tenva nodded slowly. "We've been running simulations based on the data we collected. The weapon's main vulnerability seems to be its recharge time. After a discharge, the weapon draws an enormous amount of power from the ship's core, leaving it momentarily vulnerable. If we can time our attacks during this window, we might be able to disable it before it fires again." Zorvan considered this, his mind already working through the tactical implications. "That's something, at least. But I don't want to rely on exploiting a single weakness. We need a more robust solution." Dr. Tenva looked thoughtful. "One possibility we're exploring is enhancing our ship's electromagnetic shielding. If we can increase the resilience of our systems to EM interference, we might be able to withstand a direct hit. However, that's going to take time and resources." Zorvan nodded, recognizing the challenges ahead. "We'll need to start working on that immediately. In the meantime, I want to ensure that our ships are prepared for any future encounters. If the Drac are deploying these weapons now, we can assume they'll be standard on their ships going forward." As the discussion continued, an idea formed in Zorvan's mind. "We need more information. A single battle isn't enough to develop a full countermeasure. We need to understand this weapon from the inside out." Hale raised an eyebrow, sensing where Zorvan was heading. "You're thinking of capturing a Drac ship?" Zorvan nodded grimly. "Exactly. We need to get our hands on one of their ships, preferably with the weapon intact. If we can study it up close, we might find a way to neutralize it before it becomes a widespread threat." Just as Zorvan was about to outline a plan for such a mission, a secure communication request came through from Ambassador Solane. Zorvan immediately accepted, and Solane's holographic form materialized in the center of the war room. "General Zorvan," Solane began, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of important information. "I have just received an extraordinary report from Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik. They've successfully decoded the data crystals from Akiria, and the findings are profound." Zorvan's interest was piqued immediately. "Go on, Ambassador. What have they discovered?" Solane took a moment before continuing, as if choosing his words carefully. "The crystals contain records of the Stellar Accord, an ancient alliance of which the Drac were once a part. These records paint a picture of a very different Drac, one that was noble, honorable, and deeply involved in the governance of the galaxy." The war room fell silent, the officers exchanging glances of disbelief. Zorvan, however, remained focused on Solane. "The Drac were members of the Stellar Accord? How did they become the force we're fighting today?" "That's the crux of the discovery," Solane replied. "The records show that a radical faction within Drac society, known as the Chosen Ascendants, rose to power. Their doctrine was centered on the belief that the Drac were destined to rule the galaxy. Over time, this belief consumed their society, transforming the Drac from peacekeepers into conquerors. Zorvan's expression darkened as he absorbed the implications. And this led to the war? Yes, Solane confirmed. As the Drac began to annex territories, the other members of the Stellar Accord attempted to appease them, hoping to avoid conflict. But it was never enough. Eventually, the galaxy was plunged into a devastating war. The records are fragmented, but it appears that the members of the Accord united against the Drac in a desperate bid to stop their expansion. And the outcome? Zorvan pressed. Solane sighed. The records suggest that the Drac were believed to have been wiped out in the final stages of the war. But as we know, some of them must have survived, retreating into the shadows, only to emerge now, centuries later, bent on the same destructive path. Zorvan leaned back, his mind racing with the implications of this revelation. This changes everything. The Drac are not just an enemy, they're a fallen ally corrupted by their own ideology. Exactly, Solane agreed. And while this knowledge may not provide us with a direct means to defeat them, it gives us a deeper understanding of who they are and what drives them. There's a tragic irony in the fact that we're now fighting a race that once stood alongside us. Zorvan nodded, his respect for the Drac as a formidable enemy tempered by a newfound sense of sorrow for what they had become. This history needs to be shared with the Galactic Council. They need to understand the full scope of the threat we're facing and the potential for something more. Solane's expression softened. I've already begun briefing the Council. But there's more, General. Dr. Kenson and Dr. Malik have uncovered hints in the data that there may be other planets, former members of the Stellar Accord, where repositories of knowledge were hidden. They believe these sites could hold additional records, perhaps even more detailed accounts of the Drac's fall. Zorvan's eyes sharpened with determination. Then we need to find them. If there's more information out there, we have to uncover it. It might be our only hope of understanding and, ultimately, defeating the Drac. I agree, Solane said. But tell me, General, how is the situation on your end? I sense there's something more pressing on your mind. Zorvan nodded, his expression turning grave. There is. During our recent engagement with the Drac, we encountered a new weapon, something unlike anything we've faced before. The Drac behemoth we engaged deployed a focused energy beam that not only delivered massive kinetic damage, but also disrupted our ship's electrical systems on a fundamental level. One of our Helian cruisers was incapacitated by a single hit. Solane's eyes widened with concern. That's deeply troubling. What have you learned about this weapon? We've been analyzing the data we collected from the battle, Zorvan explained. And while we've identified a potential vulnerability, the weapon requires significant time to recharge after firing. It's clear that if the Drac begin deploying this on a larger scale, our ships will be at a severe disadvantage. We need more information, and we need to develop countermeasures quickly. Solane absorbed the gravity of the situation. This is indeed a serious threat. Send me all the data you've gathered so far. I'll have our top scientists and engineers back at the Federation's research facilities analyze it. We'll need to pool our resources if we're to stay ahead of this new development. I appreciate that, Ambassador, Zorvan replied, the tension in his voice easing slightly. I'll have the data transmitted immediately. We can't afford to be caught off guard again. Solane nodded, his expression resolute. Consider it done. We'll do everything in our power to develop a countermeasure. In the meantime, continue with your efforts on the front lines. We'll keep you updated with any progress. Zorvan's attention momentarily shifted back to the data on the holo display. With your support, Ambassador, we stand a better chance of turning the tide. And as for the potential repositories of knowledge from the Stellar Accord era, I'll see to it that we start gathering intel on their locations. If they exist, they could be key to understanding not just the Drac's past, but also their current strategies. Agreed, Solane said. But first, let's ensure we're prepared for the battles ahead. The past has given us insight, but it's our actions now that will determine the future. The call ended, leaving Zorvan and his officers to digest the information. The Drac were no longer just a faceless enemy. They were a tragic figure in the galaxy's history, twisted by their own hubris. But this revelation, as enlightening as it was, didn't change the fact that they were still a threat that needed to be stopped. As the war room buzzed back to life with activity, Zorvan made a silent vow. They would find those other planets, uncover whatever secrets they held, and use that knowledge to end the Drac's reign of terror once and for all. The galaxy's past had come full circle, and now it was up to them to shape its future.